Welcome to the Rebuilding Arizona Civics podcast. This podcast aims to share our journey of sustaining Arizona's interest in reforms to civic education by implementing the Educating for American Democracy roadmap. This work is being done by an amazing group of Arizona civic teacher leaders and overseen by the Center for Political Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. I'm your host, Liz Evans, Director of Civic Education at Arizona State University, and I'll be interviewing Arizona teachers and thought leaders in civic education. We hope you enjoy our journey to make Arizona a national civics renewal model. Hello, podcast listeners. I am so excited for today's episode. We are sharing the story of Jack Holder, who is an Arizona resident. He is 100 years old, and he is a World War II vet, and his story is incredible. He will be talking about Pearl Harbor, the Doolittle raids, the Battle of Midway, some of his flights over Europe. His story is something, here at the center we hold near and dear. And another voice you're going to hear on the podcast today is Dylan, who manages our Veterans Inspiring Patriotism program to get veterans in classrooms and to really have students have that primary source. I will say a quick editing note. Jack tells the story a little bit out of order, and I made the decision to keep it that way because when we get into storytelling, often it's not chronological and we don't tell it in a specific order. And I was so enthralled sitting and listening to him for the hour that we did that I wanted to keep it exactly the way he told it. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and please check out the show notes for more information on Jack, as well as the Center's Veterans Inspiring Patriotism program.
For those of you who don't know, my name is Jack Holder. I was born December the 13th, 1921, in a small rural town 15 miles from Dallas by the name of Gunter. We only lived there for 1 year, they tell me. And we moved then 56 miles south of Wichita Falls to my father's hometown. Actually, where I was born it was actually my mother's hometown. My father was a World War I veteran. I don't know how they met. I don't know how they got together, but at any rate, that's where she lived, and that's where he was when they got married and when I was born. But thereafter, we lived at 56 miles south of Wichita Falls. My father was a farmer. And for people that don't know anything about farming, you can just imagine how terrible it was back in the days of the Great Depression. Gasoline was 15 cents a gallon, but a lot of people didn't have 15 cents. My father grew cotton, corn, barley, oats, cane, everything. We lived in a small 4-room shack that my father built. No electricity, no running water, no telephone, no toilet. We had an outside toilet and a Sears Roebuck catalog for toilet paper. We had kerosene lamps to light the house, 2 wood-burning stoves, one for heat and one for cooking. And when I went to grammar school, I walked a mile to school. Some of my young friends there rode their horse to school, but I was never that fond of riding horses. I don't know, for some, I rode a few, but I wasn't excited about it like some of the young kids. But there was a lot of kids that rode their horses to school. But at any rate, this lasted for 8 years. When I started high school, I was transported to a small town by the name of Newcastle, 7 miles away. Our school bus was a 1927 green Model A Ford truck with wooden benches down each side. The back was covered with canvas, and you can imagine how cold it was in the wintertime with those curtains flopping in the breeze. It didn't take me long to realize that farming was not going to consume my life. I had just driven a tractor pulling our neighbor's combine, and the tractor and I both made $2.50 a day. I seen some very pretty pictures of what the Navy had to offer, and I said, boy, that's for me. But my mother didn't agree. I was 18 years old. I had to have her signature, of course. I finally persuaded her. We went to Wichita Falls to the substation and started my naval career. I was then transported by train to Dallas, Texas, and went through the naval induction station there. Boarded the train for San Diego, and when I reached San Diego, I was taken immediately to the naval training station, received all of my naval clothing and all the gear and everything, was examined by the doctor, and it so happened that my final job in Texas prior to joining the Navy, I was cutting prickly pears with a long handle shovel, piling the pears, letting them dry, burning them so the cattle couldn't eat them. I had calluses on my hands you couldn't believe. The doctor looked at my hands, he said, what in the hell have you been doing? He then said, you got appendicitis. I was taken to the Naval Hospital, spent 1 month in the hospital just for appendicitis. My appendix had bursted, I think, and back in those days, we didn't get an anesthetic. They just give me a spinal injection, hung a sheet up over my stomach where I couldn't see what the doctor was doing. But a lot of the times I could certainly tell what he was doing. Man, it was awfully painful. And I asked the other doctor, I said, what in the world is he doing? He says, that's when he's pulling on your appendix. At any rate, I spent a month there, went back to the Naval Training Station, spent 2 months. Naval training teaches a lot of discipline. It turns a boy into a man. You're on the field drilling all day or studying pictures, swimming, boxing, whatever. You do all this all day. When you finish, you have an evening meal and you wash all your clothes. You hang them out on a line that's been prepared for you. And you tie the clothes up with a short piece of white line, and you better use the correct knot or you pay for it the next day. I only made one mistake. And when a young sailor joins the Navy, he rounds out his white hands and makes it square so he looks salty. We're lined up at parade rest one day, and our commanding officer was a chief gunner's mate by the name of Sartorius. I'll never forget him. He said, okay, sailors. He says, I want you to round out those white hats. He said, I know some of you are pretty salty, but most of you still smell from cow manure. And he didn't use the word manure, of course. At any rate, when we finished training, I started another course. It was aviation machinist mate school, which was the name is a little ambiguous. It's actually 4 months of training for aviation mechanic. But at any rate, I finished the school December the 6th. I was aboard the Platte, a naval tanker loaded with 6 million gallons of fuel oil on my way to Pearl Harbor. We went through a pretty good storm going to Hawaii, and the captain never slowed the ship down. I was incidentally, I was the only passenger on the ship. I was sleeping up in the forecastle, which is right in the bow of the ship. When we were in the storm, the bow would go under, water spray would go right over the stern of the ship. One of the ship's crew told me, he said he thought the captain was mad because he wanted to spend Christmas in San Diego, and that wasn't going to happen. At any rate, we reached Pearl Harbor December the 12th. I was immediately taken to Fort Allen and became part of a PBY, a patrol search and patrol squadron. A PBY did not have fixed landing gear. It had what you call beaching gear, which was installed to bring the aircraft ashore. Prior to flight, it was rolled back in the water, the beaching gear was removed. All takeoffs and landings on a PBY was made on the water. I spent the first 4 months in the beach crew. And actually that wasn't too bad. When a young sailor joins the Navy, normally he has to spend a few months as a mess cook. Mess cook is exactly what it sounds like. You clean up the mess at your cook's mess. Scrub the floors, decks of course, peel potatoes and wash the pots and pans. At any rate, when the chief come around the beach crew looking for mess cooks, the chief boatswain mate told him, he said, "You're not taking this man." So I guess I was doing a pretty good job in the beach crew. At any rate, after 4 months, I was assigned to a plane crew as a first class, as the first mechanic and a waist hatch gunner. PBOI had two 50 caliber machine guns, one on either side under the openings in the side of the aircraft, and a 30 caliber in the nose. I was the owner of one of those for 4 months. At the end of that, I became a flight engineer. Back in those days, aircrafts had a compartment which the flight engineer's compartment. The flight engineer had most of the gauges and instruments and controls of the aircraft. The pilot didn't have much in the aircraft in those days. He just had the flying instruments and the power throttles and the prop throttles. But at any rate, I became a flight engineer. Back in those days, we had training missions, which was all around Fort Allen. You might remember that early on, when this conflict started, our president, FDR, called his military staff together and says, "I want you to devise a plan to strike Tokyo." He was advised that's an impossibility. We don't have any aircraft with that capability. He managed to get up out of his wheelchair and he says, "You know, some time ago, I was very active." Thank you, Joe. Swimming, playing tennis and so forth. And I wondered why God put me in this wheelchair. He says, now I know I can look into the eyes of my military and see defeat. He said, now don't tell me it's impossible. That's when Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle was called and told to put together a group of capable flyers and start training in the B-25 on very short field takeoffs and landings. He lined up the group and says, gentlemen, I can't tell you where we're going, but we're going on a mission from which you probably won't return. But if you want to go, please step forward. Every man did. April the 2nd, 1942, they were loaded aboard the Hornet. Were then told that their mission was to bomb Tokyo. En route to Tokyo on April the 18th was 650 miles short of Tokyo and 250 miles short of their planned launching point. They were spotted by a Japanese fishing boat, and Admiral Nimitz says, I know that our position has been reported. He turned both ships into the wind and at flank speed launched 16 B-25s. They all reached their targets, dropped their bombs, but several didn't make it to China, their planned escape point. One gentleman died when he bailed out of the aircraft, 2 died in a plane crash, 8 were captured, 3 were executed.
You missed the attack on You didn't tell about Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor?
But
And the attack on Pearl Harbor?
got all that.
I'm sure they can edit it.
Yeah, I can edit all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pro at that.
When Pearl Harbor, or Honolulu actually, was a beautiful place, you know, to a small country boy who'd seen nothing but cotton fields and corn fields, all the beautiful pineapple fields there, beautiful beaches, beautiful girls on the beaches. But I had the duty that day when Yamamoto arrived. When my section fell in for muster in our hangar, the section leader began roll call. We heard a screaming aircraft, and moments later a terrible explosion. The first bomb that fell in Fort Island fell on the BP-21's hangar, which is 100 yards next to ours. All of our aircraft was parked between the 2 hangars, and half of the aircraft were on fire. We looked in the sky and seen all the aircraft with the rising sun insignia. We knew immediately what had happened. I've had so many questions on what my thoughts were at that time. And they were a lot of thoughts, of course. First was anger, surprise, one of our shipmates remembered there was a sewer line behind our hangar under construction. He said, let's go for the ditch, follow me. We all ran, jumped in the ditch, sat there clinging to each other. One of the pilots seen us, strafed the ditch with machine gun fire, missed us by probably 3 or 4 feet. He hit the dirt piled up over the ditch. This was a two-wave attack, as I'm sure you know. The first was 183 aircraft. It struck Kaneohe, Hickam Field, Schofield Barracks, Fort Island, of course. When we came out of the ditch, we started separating the burning aircraft from those that weren't damaged. But I was directed by the leading chief to help get the commanding officer's aircraft ready for flight. It was in the hangar undergoing a 30-hour check. Me and two other gentlemen installed new spark plugs and buttoned up the engine. The aircraft was rolled out, refueled, loaded with two 1,000-pound bombs. The commander and his crew flew for 19 hours looking for the Japanese fleet, but found nothing. You can't believe what I seen after that. I seen devastation that I'll never forget. Sailors jumping off their ship into water that was covered by oil and on fire. Most of them died in the water. Some of them died when they reached the beach. It was a terrible sight. Martial law was declared when the conflict first started, a complete blackout over all of the Hawaiian Islands. And late in the afternoon, machine gun pits constructed from sandbags had been set up all around Fort Island. I had the pleasure, along with two shipmates, to man one of them for 3 days and nights. We had no idea where the Japanese fleet was, or if they planned on returning, but every ship noise and every aircraft noise we heard, we knew it was them. Fortunately, that didn't happen. On the fourth day, we was returned to our barracks. All lockers had been broken open to retrieve white clothes for bandages. And we were given at that time a postcard with two inscribed inscriptions. The first one said, "I've been wounded." The second said, "I'm okay, don't worry." My mother received this card 14 days later. And when I seen my father later on, he said my mother was hysterical at that time. She got on her knees and prayed to God if he would save her son, she'd spend the rest of her life working for the church. She did. And this is where I was supposed to go into what I already told you.
No.
I can edit it and make it look like it perfectly did.
After Jimmy Doolittle, after the Jimmy Doolittle raid, that's where we're at.
Yeah. I didn't hear you though.
After we picked, where do you normally pick up after the Doolittle raid?
Yeah, after the Doolittle raid, Amon Nimitz knew there'd be retaliation after that. And he was right. Our naval intelligence began receiving many coded messages using the letters AF and AO. We had broken the Japanese code to a point. We knew that one of those stood for the Midway and the other ones were the Aleutian Islands, but you couldn't tell which one. Chief of Intelligence told Nimitz, he says, "I've devised a plan to ascertain what they mean." He says we can send out an uncoded message saying Midway has just had a freshwater condenser failure. Nimitz said, send it. The Japanese took the bait. They started sending out coded messages again. They said, AF has just had a freshwater condenser failure. We then knew what the letters meant, but we still didn't know if their plans were to strike the Aleutian Islands or Midway. Nimitz believed it would be Midway. Washington was not in full agreement. They sent a courier to talk to Nimitz, and he asked Nimitz, he said, what if you're wrong? Nimitz says, did Washington send you here to tell me not to go to Midway? The gentleman said no. He said, then you return to Washington. He then sent, in disguise, a small task force to the Aleutians, sent the rest of the fleet to the Midway, positioned the carriers in one spot, put the rest of the fleet in another. My squadron left Pearl Harbor for Midway, April 26, 1942, and began the search for the Japanese fleet. June the 3rd, 450 miles northeast of Midway, we found them. Traveling towards Midway under a weather front. We reported their position and returned to Midway. June the 4th, they arrived, 6 o'clock in the morning. The Marines on Midway were equipped with 27 Brewster Buffalo fighters. They sent all 27 aloft. Only 7 of them returned, and they were damaged beyond further flight. The Hornet launched 30 torpedo planes. Only 1 man returned, Ensign Gay. They then launched 15 more, only 4 of those returned. 45 torpedo planes, we lost 40. For the first 2 hours, we were definitely losing the battle. But that was the time when the tide was about to turn. We had airborne 3 squadrons of dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, airborne for 2 hours, running low on fuel, but he says we're going to press on for just a moment longer. Moments later he did. He seen the white wake of a fast-moving Japanese destroyer, and he says, I know that ship is racing to join the main fleet. We'll follow it. It so happened we had already given the position of the fleet, but Nagumo changed directions. That's the reason they couldn't find him. At any rate, they did press on, and moments later they found 3 aircraft carriers. Diving from 20,000 feet, they sunk all 3 in 4 minutes. They were aided by 2 factors. Japanese fighters were at a low altitude protecting their own ships from our torpedo planes, and Admiral Nagumo had received word that damage to Midway itself was slight. He says, we'll rearm with bombs and go back to Midway. Yamamoto, the commanding officer, said no. We'll rearm with torpedoes and go after their fleet. While they were rearming is when our dive bomber struck. Sometime later, Admiral Spruance, who incidentally had replaced Admiral Halsey on the Enterprise, called Admiral Nimitz and said, Admiral, We've had a great day. We just sunk 3 aircraft carriers. Do you think that's enough? He said, hell no, I want the 4th one. It was found sometime later and also sunk. I was airborne that morning at 4 o'clock. Airborne, loaded with 4 500-pound bombs. Early in the afternoon, we struck gold. We found a torpedo, we found a Japanese sub, had surfaced, all hatches were closed, no one was on the deck. We dropped 2 bombs, one on the fantail, one right behind the conning tower. We made 6 circles around it watching it sink. It was a beautiful sight. Later on, we had lost all radio contact with Midway. We didn't know whether we still held the island or the Japanese had it. We had an option. We could take a chance on going back to Midway, or we could sit down and see. We dropped our 2 remaining bombs unarmed, sat down at sea, threw out a sleeping bag, and drifted all night. I took a sleeping bag, climbed on top of the wing, tied myself to an antenna, and spent the night. As I lay there listening to the waves splashing against the side of the aircraft, I've been asked what my thoughts were at that time. I said, well, probably what I remember is maybe farming wasn't that bad. Anyway, sun up the next morning, we finally made radio contact with Midway. We learned that we had been successful. We also were told there was a destroyer at the French frigate shoals loaded with aviation fuel. We took sunshots, found our positions, flew to the shoals, refueled, went to Midway. The next day, all seaplanes were out looking for down seamen. We found the 2 gentlemen in a life raft, but we were low on fuel at that time. We radioed a sister ship. They landed, picked up the gentlemen, took them to Midway. The next day, we all returned to Honolulu. Had 5 glorious days at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. But that was short-lived. July the 1st, I was on my way to Guadalcanal. Our first stop was Noumea, New Caledonia, which is some miles short of Guadalcanal. At that time, Admiral Gourmet was in charge of all the forces at Guadalcanal, and we're also losing that battle at the time. He had never even been on the island of Guadalcanal. He was relieved by Admiral Halsey. Halsey came aboard. Incidentally, we were tending off the Curtis, the seaplane tender. We hadn't slept aboard it, but our aircraft were tied to a buoy out in the bay. And that's where we took off from and came back and landed in all of our searching of Guadalcanal and all the Solomon Islands. Admiral Halsey came aboard the Curtis, shook hands with everybody. moved my squadron to Espiritu Santo, which was 300 miles closer to Guadalcanal. He then went to Guadalcanal, visited every unit on the island. He says, we'll no longer allow the enemy to call the shots. He says, we'll kill every son of a bitch on this island and I'll be right there with you. He instilled a fighting spirit. Things began to change. As soon as we took Henderson Field, half of my squadron received orders to travel to Pearl Harbor. Incidentally, our transportation back to Pearl Harbor was on a cargo ship. And the captain of that ship made us unload the ship before we would give us passage back to Pearl Harbor. No drinking, no fresh water on the ship. We bathed in salt water. Any rate, when we reached Pearl Harbor, our orders were extended. We had orders to further travel to San Diego, supposedly to help commission a new squadron of PBYs and return to the Pacific. But when we got to San Diego, our orders had been changed. We started training in B-24 Liberators. Spent 2 months in San Diego training. Moved to Argentia, Newfoundland for another 2 months. April 1943, I was in Duxwell, Devonshire, England, where I began patrol and a submarine patrol of the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay, which is the western coast of France. Spent 15 months there, flew 56 missions over the English Channel. It so happened that prior to our arrival, the British were trying to combat the German U-boat in the channel with PBYs, which was not expected. The Navy commissioned 5 squadrons of B-24 Liberators. The 5 squadrons flew 6,454 missions over the channel, sunk 8 submarines, and damaged 4 more. I received credit for one of them. Early June 1944, I received orders to travel to Chincoteague, Virginia, to help commission a new squadron of B-24 Liberators. But this was just before the invasion, of course. The war was dwindling down at that time. The squadron was never commissioned, but I spent a year there as a flight engineer, was then transferred to Pensacola, Florida for another year in the Navy's version of the B-24, which was a single vertical tail, of course, larger engines, more guns, but it came along too late to see very much combat missions. But I spent a year there as a plane captain, was transferred to Patuxent River, was a flight engineer there on the R-5D, which was a DC-4 kind of commercial aviation, but the Navy called it an R-5D. But at any rate, I spent a year there. Was honorably discharged April 24th, 1948. I immediately went to Brandon Airways in Dallas, got my civilian flight engineer's rating. 1950, I left Dallas and Brandon, moved to Los Angeles, went to work for Northrop Aircraft, spent 3 months there at Hawthorne Field, which is only a short distance from the main station in Los Angeles. 3 months with Northrop Aircraft. I looked across the runway one morning, and here sat 2 Brandon aircraft. Still had the Brandon insignia on the tail. I said, I've got to go over there and see what's going on. I went over and found out that it belonged to Los Angeles Air Service, which was their hangar at that time. I met the gentleman that owned the squadron, owned the airline, excuse me. A gentleman by the name of Kirk Kercoin. I was immediately hired on the spot as a flight engineer. 3 months later, he said all the flight engineers is going to have a pilot's license and an aircraft and an instrument rating so they can double as co-pilot. I had neither one. I rushed out and bought a single engine aircraft, a Luscombe aircraft, single engine, and working in the hangar as a mechanic. I flew the aircraft before I went to work, during my lunch hour, and when I got off work. 6 months I had both licenses. Went back to work as co-pilot. Spent 7 months with the airline. 7 months. 7 years with the airline. Got a call one morning for the owner's secretary. She says, Jack, we got to start looking for a job. The Kirk just sold all the aircraft. I immediately went to work for Union Oil Company of California as a co-pilot. Spent 1 year as a co-pilot. Spent another 9 years as a captain of the airline. And my wife at that time decided I'd done enough flying. She wanted me to quit flying, and I made another mistake. I did. I went to work for Air Research, it was called at that time. Spent 20 years there as an engineer. The last 7 years I was a manager of an engineering department. And during that time, I left Air Research and went to a small town north of Tyler, Texas. Was assistant golf pro for 2 years. Didn't make much money, but I had a lot of fun. I then formed an oil drilling company from which I was the chairman and CEO of for 4 years. We drilled a lot of wells. We drilled 27 wells, in fact, in Oklahoma, 6 in Illinois, I made a lot of money there, but money to drill an oil well was easy to find then. If you drill a dry hole, the person that's put up the money could write it off in a tax report. First of 1983, they changed the tax laws. You could no longer write it off. Most oil companies went dry. Phillips Petroleum actually almost went dry. I tried to keep my company alive. I paid off two employees in the company with a lot of money. I kept 4 employees, which I paid their salary out of my pocket for 1 year. Drilled 2 wells in Louisiana out of my pocket. And when I run out of money, I called our research and I told my former boss, I said, the oil business has just gone dry. I need to come back. He says, come on. That's when I went back and spent another year's with our research. In December of 1991, I hung them up, started playing golf. That's it.
Jack, with you being involved with veteran groups around here in Arizona, when did you get involved of sharing your story and kind of reliving what you had done?
About 14 years ago, I never even told my golfing partners that I was a World War II veteran, let alone Pearl Harbor. I met a young lady who, in fact, lived with me a while. She asked me so many questions. She finally told me that you've got to come out of the closet. You got to start talking to people. My first object I made was I boarded the Arizona honor flight, went to Washington, D.C. We made a stop in Detroit, and there was a throng of people 200 yards long, lined up on the tarmac as when we landed in Detroit to greet our plane. The terminal was full of greeters. It was then I learned that there was people out there that still remembered and still cared. That's when I started making presentations.
When you went on the honor flight, and for people who listen to this, Honor Flight's an organization that takes veterans to Washington, D.C. to visit their respective memorials. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was quite an experience. They had beautiful ornaments there that the World War II crew built. First started off with Pearl Harbor, Guadalcanal, all that, and stepping stones around the whole affair there, all the way to Tokyo and stuff. It had the plastic or concrete monuments of all of those affairs. It was very beautiful.
Well, of all these years of sharing your stories, I guess, our story from the early 2000s, how has that benefited you? Has it helped you, and do you continue to enjoy that?
Well, it helped me. You know, when I end all these presentations, especially to the younger folks, by telling them, you know, that to stay in school, get all the education they can. And I tell them, you know, that education was not as necessary, you know, when I grew up as it is today. And sometimes all the education you get in school is still not enough here, but staying till you get all you can. When you see the American flag, you need to treasure it. And remember one thing, you live in the greatest country in the world. It's not always right, but it's the greatest in the world. And when these kids enjoy that, hollering, yelling, everything, it's a great pleasure to me. But I feel like I've done a little good then. I give a presentation to a group of high school graduates in New York, 364 of them. And when I gave them all that dialogue, they stood up as one unit hollering, and it was really nice.
Well, absolutely. I think it does a lot of good to promote that message to the youth.
It really did, yeah.
Yeah, and we appreciate your service and all you do to continue to spread your story and that message.
And Joe's been with me on a lot of these trips now. He can tell you how the people do there. It's we had a group at Gilbert the other day. Benjamin what high school?
Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, Benjamin Franklin high schools, and there was over 400 people there. But I never thought we'd finish shaking hands. The line was so long. But they was very appreciative.
How many students do you think you've talked to since you started doing this? How many students do you think you've been able to talk to since you've started?
Well, I made 52 presentations last year.
So we're probably in the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long you been talking to students?
Yeah.
How long have you been talking to students? The whole 14 years, or
Oh yeah. My first
times that by 14?
first students was Araby or something like that. I think that was the name of it. Anyway, it was my first presentation here was to a 6th grade class. And I really didn't know how to start the presentation, but I asked them, I said, how many of you have ever heard of Pearl Harbor? And half of them raised their hand. But at any rate, I made the presentation, and a few days later, I got a thank you card from 56 individual students. I signed every one of them, took them back out there. When I walked in the room, boy, they stood up and hollered. I said, you remember me? They said, we sure do. We want to hear you again.
That's great.
So that's what's enjoyable about it.
What's the youngest group?
Huh?
What's the youngest group of?
That's what I was going to tell him. About a month ago, I went to Sun Lake's school over here to a group of 4-year-olds. Now, Darlene made the arrangements. She thought it was 4th grade people what we was going to see. She didn't know, but it was 2 groups of 25 people, 4-year-olds. But they were so nice and so appreciative. I didn't go through a whole presentation with them. I just read a story to them, that they, and some of them said, my uncle was, he was in something, my granddad,
Yeah.
So they were really nice and really appreciative.
Yeah, I think it's a unique opportunity for students of all ages to hear these stories.
Yeah.
And especially, as you know, the greatest generation. There's a reason they were called that. So
Yeah, that's right.
to hear some from someone like you, that's
Yeah,
a treat for them.
I told a lot of the people, you know, that they call us the greatest generation, but I said, you know, you stay in school and learn all you can be the next greatest generation. You can, in this country, you can be what you want to be. If you can't do it one way, try another way.
Good message. Well, we sincerely appreciate you taking time to share your story with us. And appreciate your service.
Yeah, I'm sorry it started off wrong, man.
No, I think it was great.
Yeah.
He's the only one that we know of that has sunk a Japanese submarine in the Pacific theater and a German submarine in the European theater and shot down a Messerschmitt. He did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Does it seem like a long time ago, or?
Oh, it does when you really think about it, but and then again, you know, when you really start drilling on it, it seems like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I can see all of it like it was yesterday.
Tell him about the German sub.
German sub. Well, I guess they tell me it went down in history as the longest battle ever of a German sub. It was, it suffered 4 attacks. The first one was British PBY. And I don't remember all the details. Start off the sub had surfaced to charge their batteries when the PBY found it, and I think they maybe done a little damage to it. They made enough that the sub submerged again. When they surfaced again, it was another PBY, and I think it suffered about the same thing. But the third attack was from a B-17. And what was the damage from that one? You remember, Joe?
No.
I don't remember. It did cause little damage to it, but again, it's submerged. When it surfaced again is when we arrived, 4 o'clock. And we were lucky. We sunk it.
Mm-hmm.
The story was, you know, it was the longest sub battle in history, I guess.
That battle also, there's a book that somebody wrote that said that their plane was shot down and all hands were lost.
Yeah,
It
sure.
looks pretty good for it, doesn't
Sure
it?
that book. Yeah, they got it all wrong,
Wow.
I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. That's
When
great.
you were in San Diego, where were you? Like,
What?
were you stationed and trained?
What now?
When you were in San Diego, was there a place that you were trained at?
Oh, I was in Naval Training Station.
Does that have a name?
Fort Island, North Island.
Calvert and Croak was the name of his B-24.
Okay.
Well, we'll take a picture of that.
Yeah.
We'll get it later.
They're working on trying to change the record.
That is.
Whoops.
And then it's found by looking up the records there. There's a place in Indiana, I think, that have made and selling identical B-24 about this long with my name on it. With,
Oh, wow.
with Calvert and Coke's name on it.
Wow.
Now he said it was they said that, well, he's got the information, I think I wrote it down somewhere where it's available, but he also said that they're supposed to have it at Walmart.
Oh, really?
I'm gonna find out if they do,
Well, great. Well, appreciate you sharing that. I'm also working with Dennis because I know Dennis does in-class presentations.
yeah,
And us being at ASU, we're working on trying to integrate some nice materials that vets can leave behind for the students to continue learning
Yeah.
and become more civic engaged.
yeah.
So,
And he wanted me to dig out all my pictures, which I have.
yeah.
He was gonna put them together for, I don't remember what he's gonna make with it, but that's what he wanted for.
Yeah. He's a techie guy. I think he's going to put him in one of those PowerPoint presentations. So when you go in the classroom, you can pop them up on the wall.
He is, yeah.
So that'll be a great addition. So
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions?
No,
Or-
this stuff is so important
Yeah.
because they can only learn so much from a textbook. So one of the things Dylan and I are trying to work on is capturing these stories
I've had,
because students, like when they listen to you, the students are more engaged. If you hand them a book and say, here, read this and learn about history, they don't. And so we're trying to just bring these to life and bring them more into students' lives.
I've had so many of them tell me that they said, we want to hear it. We don't want to hear it from a historian, we want to hear it from a person that was there.
Yep.
Then they get a real story.
Yeah, yeah.
Jack earned 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses. During World War II, all branches of service, like the Navy, the Army Air Corps, and the Marine Corps, they only gave out 2,000 total.
Right.
And Jack got 2 of them.
So our aviation, that's the highest award you can get aside from the Medal of Honor, I believe, correct? Yeah. That's amazing.
Yep.
You were serving there at the same time as Joe Foss was at Guadalcanal, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I heard the fields there that they were taking the Grumman Wildcats off of were so bad they basically were constructed of chain link fence because it was so muddy and they were getting a lot of rain at that time, so they just laid down chain link fence on the island as far as so the planes could actually take off and land.
I was never on the island, but I was over it a lot of times.
Yeah, that's great. Well, if we could grab some pictures of you with us, Jack, or just we'd appreciate that. If that's okay with you.
Thank you for listening. You can find the Center for Political Thought and Leadership on social media channels. Please subscribe to our podcast wherever you find your favorite podcast. And on a last note, the views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily represent the Center for Political Thought and Leadership or Arizona State University.